You are walking down a street and you see a wallet lying on the pavement. You pick it up. Inside, there is a large sum of cash and a driver's license with a name and an address. There is no one around, no cameras, no witnesses. In that moment, a silent conversation begins inside your own mind. A part of you might feel the temptation of the money, the sheer luck of the find. But another part, a deeper and more insistent voice, tells you what you ought to do. It speaks of fairness, of empathy for the person who lost it, of the simple principle of returning what isn't yours. Where does that voice come from? For millennia, humanity has answered with a single, powerful word: God. Religion has long positioned itself as the sole foundation of objective morality. It provides a divine rulebook, commandments etched in stone and delivered by prophets, offering a clear, unwavering line between good and evil. Without this divine anchor, we are told, we would be lost in a sea of subjective preference, where anything could be justified and no action is truly right or wrong. But what if this foundation, upon closer inspection, is not as solid as it seems? What if the very attempt to ground morality in God leads to a paradox that crumbles the entire structure? Over 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato posed a question so sharp and so devastating, it has challenged believers ever since. It is known as the Euthyphro Dilemma, and it asks this: is something morally good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? This is not merely a clever word game. This question presents two horns of a dilemma, and grasping either one has profound and troubling consequences for the nature of morality and the nature of God himself. In this video, we will explore both paths of this ancient problem. We will see how one path makes morality arbitrary and God a potential tyrant, and how the other makes God irrelevant as a source of goodness. And finally, we will explore a third path, one that suggests morality was never handed down from the heavens, but was instead forged right here on earth, in the heart of our shared human experience. Let us first take the first horn of the dilemma, the position known as divine command theory. This is the idea that goodness and morality are a direct result of God's commands. An act is good only because God says it is good. Murder is wrong only because God has forbidden it. In this view, there is no independent standard of morality. God's will is the standard. The appeal of this position is obvious. It provides a clear, objective, and absolute foundation for right and wrong. It removes all human doubt and cultural relativism. Morality is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of divine decree. What is good for one person is good for all people, for all time, because God has commanded it. But this certainty comes at a terrifying price. If an act is only good because God commands it, then morality becomes entirely arbitrary. It means that, in principle, God could have commanded the exact opposite. He could have commanded that cruelty, theft, and murder are morally good. And by the logic of divine command theory, they would be. If God were to command tomorrow, "Thou shalt torture children," that act would, by definition, become righteous. This reduces morality to a mere expression of raw power. It strips the word good of any inherent meaning and replaces it with obedient. This is the arbitrariness problem, and it turns God not into a source of goodness, but into an unpredictable cosmic dictator whose whims define reality. We do not even need to resort to hypotheticals. The sacred texts themselves are filled with troubling commands that test this theory. In the Old Testament, God commands Abraham to sacrifice his own son, Isaac, as a test of faith. The story is presented as the ultimate act of piety, but the command itself, viewed from any normal moral perspective, is monstrous. The text commands the Israelites to commit genocide against the Canaanites, to own slaves, and to execute people for minor infractions like working on the Sabbath. According to a strict divine command theorist, all of these acts were morally good at the time they were commanded. This forces believers into an impossible position: either concede that genocide and slavery can be good, or admit that God's commands are not the sole source of goodness. Furthermore, this horn of the dilemma makes the statement, "God is good," a completely empty phrase. If good simply means whatever God commands, then saying God is good is just saying God does what God commands. It's a circular statement, a tautology that tells us nothing about God's character. It's like saying the CEO is the boss. It's true by definition, but it doesn't tell you if the CEO is wise, kind, or just. Divine command theory ultimately hollows out the meaning of goodness, leaving behind only the demand for unquestioning obedience to power. Faced with this troubling conclusion, many thoughtful believers are forced to grasp the other horn of the dilemma. Let us now explore that second path, the idea that God commands an act because it is good. This position seems far more reasonable and intuitive. It suggests that goodness is a real, objective standard that exists independently of God. Concepts like compassion, justice, and fairness are inherently good, and God, in His infinite wisdom, recognizes this and commands us to act in accordance with this independent moral law. This solves the arbitrariness problem. God can no longer command cruelty to be good, because cruelty is inherently bad, and God's perfect nature would never command something that violates the standard of goodness. He is not a cosmic dictator, but a perfectly reliable guide to a moral truth that stands on its own. But this solution, while escaping the first problem, creates an entirely new one that is just as devastating to the idea of God as the foundation of morality. If the standard of good and evil exists independently of God, then God is no longer the source or author of morality. He becomes at best a divine middleman. He is a cosmic law promoter, pointing to a moral truth that exists outside of himself. He is no longer the lawgiver, but merely the world's greatest law enforcer. This makes God subservient to a higher moral standard. It means morality is superior to God, and He must conform to its principles just as we must. This realization has a profound consequence. It makes God redundant for morality. If goodness is an independent standard that even God must look to, then in principle, we humans could do the same. If we can use our reason and empathy to understand that causing needless suffering is wrong, then we are accessing the same moral standard that God does. We don't need the divine middleman to tell us that compassion is good if we can recognize its goodness ourselves. The second horn of the Euthyphro Dilemma, in its attempt to save God's character, ends up firing him from his job as the universe's moral anchor. It opens the door to a world where morality can be understood and practiced without any divine revelation at all. Finding both horns of the dilemma wanting, we are left to consider a third, radical alternative: that morality was never handed down from above, but was instead built up from below. This is the scientific and humanistic view, that morality is a natural phenomenon, with deep roots in our evolutionary past. This perspective does not begin with ancient texts or divine beings, but with a simple observation: humans are social animals, and for social animals, certain behaviors are essential for the survival and flourishing of the group. These behaviors are the raw material of morality. We see the building blocks of morality in our primate relatives. Chimpanzees exhibit empathy, comforting a victim after a fight. Bonobos share food and form complex coalitions. These are not learned from a holy book. They are evolved behavioral strategies. Over millions of years, evolution favored traits that promoted group cohesion. Early humans who were better at cooperating, showing empathy, enforcing fairness, and building trust were more likely to survive, hunt successfully, and raise their offspring. Empathy is not a divine spark. It is a powerful biological tool that allows us to understand the emotional state of another, creating the bonds necessary for a functioning society. Morality, in its earliest form, was the instinctual grammar of social survival. Of course, human morality is far more complex than primate instinct. Our instincts for empathy and fairness provided the foundation, but it was our capacity for reason, language, and abstract thought that built the skyscraper. We moved from "this feels wrong" to "why does this feel wrong?" We began to codify our instincts into rules, customs, and laws. We told stories, created myths, and developed philosophies to explore better ways of living together. This is the great project of human history, the slow, often messy, and ongoing process of expanding our moral understanding. We did not receive a finished moral code. We have been discovering and creating it, generation by generation. Break time, us. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence for this human-centered view of morality is the concept of the expanding circle. The philosopher Peter Singer has noted that over the course of history, the circle of beings to whom we grant moral consideration has steadily grown. In ancient tribes, moral duties often extended only to one's own kin. In early civilizations, they expanded to one's city or nation, but often excluded foreigners, slaves, and women from full moral status. The very religious texts once claimed as the source of morality explicitly sanctioned slavery and treated women as property. But through reason, debate, and social struggle, we challenge these limitations. The abolitionist movement, the fight for women's suffrage, and the campaign for civil rights were all instances where human reason and empathy overrode centuries of divine tradition. Our moral progress has often been achieved not because of religious dogma, but in spite of it. This brings us to the great fear that often underlies the entire debate. It is the argument, famously articulated by Dostoevsky's character Ivan Karamazov, that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. This is the ultimate threat of the religious apologist, that without the divine lawgiver and the promise of celestial reward and punishment, society would collapse into a brutal free-for-all of selfish indulgence. Without the fear of hell or the hope of heaven, why would anyone choose to be good, especially when being bad is often easier or more profitable? This is a powerful emotional argument, but it is based on a profound misunderstanding of both atheism and human nature. To suggest that the only reason a person is good is to gain a reward or avoid a punishment is to paint a deeply cynical picture of humanity. It suggests that our natural state is one of monstrous selfishness, held in check only by a divine leash. But this is not what we see. People all over the world, including millions of atheists and agnostics, live decent, compassionate, and ethical lives. They do so not out of fear, but out of a direct recognition of the humanity of others. A secular person returns the lost wallet because they can empathize with the anxiety of the person who lost it. They refrain from violence because they understand that others suffer just as they do. Their morality comes from a horizontal commitment to fellow human beings, not a vertical obedience to a cosmic authority. In many ways, a good deed, done without any expectation of eternal reward, is a purer moral act than one done with a heavenly retirement plan in mind. So, we have journeyed through the great dilemma. The path of divine command theory led us to an arbitrary morality where goodness is meaningless. The path where morality is independent of God led us to a redundant deity, unnecessary for ethical life. This leaves us standing on the solid ground of the third path, the recognition that morality is a human project. It is not a perfect, finished monument to be worshipped, but a garden that we must continually tend. It is rooted in the soil of our evolved empathy and watered by our collective reason. Sometimes its growth is slow, and sometimes its branches are twisted by the prejudices of an era, but its trajectory has been one of slow, steady expansion. Morality is not a rigid, ancient code we must obey without question. It is a living, breathing, and ongoing conversation about how to best live together, how to minimize harm, and how to maximize well-being. Our task is not to decipher the will of an unseen being, but to listen to the very real needs of the beings all around us. It means our moral responsibility is greater, not lesser. We cannot outsource our conscience to a holy book or a divine decree. We are the authors of our ethical world, and we are accountable for its contents. The challenge is not to follow a perfect moral law, but to dedicate ourselves to the never-ending project of creating a more perfect moral world together.